Alright guys, that's Scrappy again today. Hope you're all doing well and enjoying your day so far. A crazy day yesterday inside and outside of the Call of Duty world, but in the COD sense itself, OpTic FormaL confirming that after he leaves Halo at the end of the season, which he said for some time, he will be returning to play Black Ops 6 on a professional level for next season. Surely part of this plan is to play for OpTic again. Will that be possible though with their current roster? And if it isn't, what might FormaL do in the meantime before potentially trying a similar strategy to what he did in Halo to finesse his way back onto the team? So very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Yesterday was wild, by the way. Like, obviously there was loads of tweets about this whole Trump assassination attempt thing, and it's just one of these moments that you look at and you think, wow, like, this is history happening right now before our eyes. Obviously there was discussion on whether tweets like this were fair or not. And, you know, lots of reaction from the players on this type of stuff as well. Some tweets stayed up, some tweets got deleted, but yeah, I think it's, I mean, look, I guess presidential assassination attempts or whatever aren't exactly a new thing, but definitely a scary world in which we live in, certainly for America right now, where this kind of political violence is becoming commonplace again, it seems. So, scary times. I wonder what it's going to be like in a couple of days when I'm out there in Dallas, like what the general feeling is going to be in the States. But, you know, of course, Adam Apicella, among others, had some tweets on the situation, and the fact that I believe an innocent bystander, like an attendee, was killed basically as a kind of like collateral damage, I suppose you want to say. So yeah, really unacceptable and scary times, to be fair. But on the other side of it, of course, it launched a barrage of memes, and you know, there was a few interesting ones going around. There was a couple that made it, I think, to the Reddit, but you know, they were swiftly deleted, and then there was a couple of other ones that were making them their way around the timeline. But look, what I really wanted to talk about today was the FormaL stuff, right? And we'll get into that in a second. Before we get there, how about some other teams that might potentially be considering his services next season, right? Because there have been rumours, the Flank talked about this, that Space Station, Fnatic, TSM, Gen.G, Falcons, maybe even among other organisations, are interested in the CDL. Now, to be fair, some of these teams have actually just straight up said this. I think it was basically the CEO of Space Station, or like one of the founders, pretty much said, yeah, like, we're interested in getting into COD, would be down. Of course, notable organisation, the Halo world, especially now. It's absolutely more possible than it has been in a long time, just because the teams are now accessible. You no longer have to pay a ridiculous $25 million buy-in, and the teams, you know, are the spots of, let's say, Los Angeles Guerrillas, is that worth anything anymore, really? Just because the franchise league is effectively now over, and they're going back to how it was previously. There's still, you know, franchises on some level, but the amount of money that they paid is getting paid back. So how much is the spot really worth? So it opens the door to other teams getting in. We are pretty sure this will be happening at some point, and this is the reason why expansion is probably unlikely, is because yes, there are interested organisations, but it's, I would say, likely that, as is described here in this Reddit post, the poverty orgs get bought out first, right? The likes of, you know, if TSM want to come in, if Fnatic, Space Station, Gen.G, Falcons, you know, they want to come into the sport. Falcons would be a very interesting one, just because, you know, they effectively have unlimited money, right? So Falcons is the Saudi Arabian-owned team. They do actually have a team in Call of Duty, and they won the recent European Challengers Elite stage, I think it was, or maybe one of the cups, but they won something notable anyway in the European Challenger side, and they are probably going to be at the Esports World Cup. We're not exactly sure how the qualification works for that right now, but I would be surprised if Team Falcons aren't represented in the competitive Call of Duty side of the World Cup. But let's say Falcons come in and they say, hey, you know, Los Angeles Guerrillas, let's just buy your spots basically, and either maybe the whole intention of it being city-based disappears, or they become the ReeaL Falcons, or whatever they would decide to do potentially, if that was the case. There's been rumours that especially, you know, the Falcons or the Saudis, they've been interested in getting into competitive COD now again for, you know, just involved on a more deep level for years, and now it seems more likely than ever that it might potentially happen. So, you know, there's a reason why, especially because many of these organisations getting involved in the World Cup, they're interested in getting into COD. So the Cloud9 thing happened recently with the Subliners. Maybe there is more to come on that. And like, if Falcons get involved, or even if some of these other teams get involved that have some resources and some money, it really would switch things up, right? Because, you know, theoretically, some of these teams, especially because there's no salary cap anymore, could go through and just rip apart Atlanta FaZe's trio potentially, if they were willing to spend the amount of money that it might take to make that happen. So could be very interesting for the league if it occurs. And I think a lot of fans would probably agree that getting rid of some of these organizations that we have towards the bottom of the league wouldn't necessarily be such a bad idea. But let's talk about this FormaL stuff, because wow, this was a bombshell. I know a couple of you guys talked about this to me yesterday, and I thought, you know what, let me just wait for some of the clips to come through, some of the reactions to come through, so we can discuss it in more detail, what this might potentially mean. But let me share this clip here. So FormaL's on stream just at the start of his stream that he did yesterday, saying straight up he is going to be playing at Black Ops 6 on a professional level.
That's one. Am I planning on playing Black Ops 6? I am planning on it. I'm planning on playing that fucking shit professional, to be honest. Professionally. Only the 272 of you guys know that for now.
So FormaL has made it quite clear now for some time that his time in Halo is going to be over, right? After retiring from competitive Call of Duty in 2021, it looked like he was going to call it a day to his career. It seemed like, you know what, he's done competing, but all of a sudden Halo Infinite came out after that Cold War season. He was, you know, okay, he retired from COD, but he was going to get dropped from OpTic Chicago if he didn't retire, because he just wasn't, you know, all that committed or as good that season as he was in previous years. Now, a committed FormaL is a very different FormaL to an uncommitted FormaL in terms of what results you can tend to expect. And after enjoying Halo Infinite, he goes over there and eventually finesses his way onto OpTic, and that's kind of what I want to discuss in a second with what may happen on this OpTic Call of Duty situation as well. But after that, of course, gets onto OpTic. Over the last couple of years has won multiple events, including the World Championship in 2022, of course. So, you know, crazy timeline, and FormaL was a massive part of that, and still to this day is considered, you know, the greatest controller FPS player that we have ever seen. However, FormaL wants to return to competitive COD. He likes the idea, as do the likes of Priestahh, among others, of playing Call of Duty again on a professional level, and you've got to understand that it's a bit of a different time now to how it was back then, depending on the way the season goes. For the majority of Cold War, and really the year before that MW19, where FormaL lost his motivation, it was all online, right? The pandemic had happened, there was no LAN Call of Duty. Now, do I think FormaL is going to be grinding his, you know, heart out to play online qualifiers in a similar way to Priestahh is better on LAN than online? Probably not, let's be honest. So I think that the format of the new season does change a little bit how well I would expect FormaL to do on this return. But when, as I say, the greatest controller FPS player ever becomes available and says, hey, I'm coming back, like, it's obviously going to turn heads, right? World champion in Call of Duty, one of the greatest to ever do it, so many events won. So, you know, obviously he's going to end up somewhere if he wants to play. The question is where, and what would the plan precisely be? Because I wanted to share this just to explain. When he went to Halo, OpTic had a team, right? It was aBeZy, Pistola, Lucid, and Trippy, I'm pretty sure was the roster of 4. And FormaL felt like, you know what, I can get onto that team if I, if I do the classic FormaL thing. And FormaL has done this for years. Like, even when he first came into Call of Duty, back in effectively Ghosts, you know, he went from TK to Envy, and then very quickly went through a few teams, basically team hopped his way to OpTic within about 6 months, which is not easy to do, but he did it. And he did the same thing in Halo, right? So when Halo came out, he played a couple of tournaments, he was on SSG, then he went to Sentinels, like I think he even played on like FaZe for a couple of days or something, right? Effectively OpTic loaned him out, because he was still on OpTic, he was still a content creator of OpTic, whatever. They loaned him out to these teams, and then FormaL worked his magic behind the scenes, and it became evident that, okay, maybe FormaL in, Pistola out is the thing to do. That's what happened. He gets to play for OpTic, and they win basically everything from then to the end of the season. So, could something similar be occurring again here on the OpTic Call of Duty team? Because, well, we'll discuss the OpTic stuff first, and then I guess we can talk about what other teams should be interested. Their current roster OpTic is very good on paper. Kenny, Dashy, Pred, Shotzzy. It's, you know, as I've said before, in terms of talent, the way that it's been put together, the potential there, I think it's the best team they've had since the Dynasty. They won an event this season, but since then, of course, it's gone rather downhill. So why? We don't really know. Is it, you know, Kenny and Pred related? That's obviously been a bit of a debate, but there's probably more to it there than meets the eye. But we know that Dashy and FormaL, they were a duo a couple of years ago back in Cold War, and it didn't really work especially well, right? I think they clashed somewhat in terms of who was going to play faster, who was going to play slower. Neither of them. Dashy was good that year, FormaL wasn't so good. It just wasn't that effective, right? And this team just did not do as well as they should have done given the talent on the roster. So if you run it back with Dashy and FormaL, is it any different, right? I mean, it would be incredible to witness, but is it much different? Then again, for OpTic, if you're Dashy, like in Dashy's boots, I guess you got to understand, like, he was FormaL's protege in some sense. Like, he's the guy that was going to take over from FormaL as the main AR of the team and kind of continue that legacy. And now Dashy's thinking, am I going to get dropped for, like, my old man type thing? Like, is FormaL going to come back in and get rid of me? Because, you know, there is a good argument to say that you don't want to get rid of Kenny given what he's done for the team. But there's obviously also the talk about, you know, Kenny's tweets that he did towards, well, kind of implying that Pred or whoever on the team was making mistakes and then deleted loads of those tweets back during Major 4 and even before then. How does he fit into the culture? Because, you know, Dashy fits into the OpTic culture very well. He's been on that organisation for a long time, and that doesn't really seem massively set to change. But Kenny, on the other hand, is obviously relatively new. So, I mean, obviously, FormaL's going to come in as a main AR, right? He's not going to run a sub, let's be real. So, and Kenny could flex, potentially, could go to an SMG, but I'm not sure that's really what makes the most sense for the team. So, maybe there is a world in which FormaL can fit into this OpTic team again. Is it the best idea? I don't know. But if Hex hears FormaL say, hey, I want to come back to play competitive cards and I want to do it for OpTic, because obviously that's, you know, what he'll want to do as the #1 intention, then could they make it happen if Champs doesn't go so well? I think it's definitely possible. So then you got to wonder, though, if that doesn't happen and he can't get an OpTic, at least immediately, because OpTic might understandably say, are we really sure that FormaL, 3 years on, 4 years on from when he looked not the best back in 2021, is he really going to be the player now to lead us back to championships? I mean, there's so many positive attributes to FormaL as a player, but I think you can realistically ask that question right now. So, and also because of the way that he retired before, who's to say that similar occurrence doesn't happen again, where he loses motivation and then it's done for his crew and then there's more chaos, more changes, stuff like this. But somebody will sign FormaL. I mean, that just is what it is. And is it going to be the Las Vegas Legion? Probably not. But there are some other teams out there worth considering, right? Because if it's not OpTic, I did even mention when FormaL discussed this initially before he's now made it more public that, you know, Toronto isn't maybe the worst thing to consider, right? Just because if they don't do so well at Champs Toronto, Scrappy might be looking at Insight and thinking, you know, is FormaL an upgrade on Insight? Probably yes. I mean, let's be real. In terms of like exactly the role they would play. And I feel like FormaL and Scrap as an AR duo from like a pacing perspective would be really quite nice. So if the top teams, that's maybe the one that if I was FormaL I'd be looking at to try and say to Hex, hey, you know, can you loan me to Toronto or something so I can play for them? But, you know, then again, do OpTic Texas want FormaL as like, you know, OpTic player or whatever? Maybe he just has to straight up leave OpTic if he wants to play on one of these other teams, to be fair, and then maybe comes back at some point. I'm sure they'd welcome him back with open arms as a content creator or whatever when he decides to retire again. But like, do OpTic want FormaL to go to another real top contending team? Probably not. So what's the solution here? I think the other teams I'd look at are like, you know, Surge. Some of the teams in that mid-pack that maybe have some upsides. Surge, I think, are one of them. Boston, I think, even, you know, it's funny to mention Boston, but they've got the resources, they've got the money, like they could theoretically make that happen, I suppose. And maybe there's a couple of others like Thieves, and obviously if some of those other organizations come through, then you've got a different question on your hands. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.